Item I, review of the 2014 through 2017 preliminary budget estimates.
And again, we've been talking about this for quite some time now, actually, starting in January, and any opportunity that has come up. We talked about it at the annual meeting. We've talked about it at our finance committee meeting. We've talked about it at our last board academy. We're here to talk about it tonight. We'll probably talk about it until the board makes a decision on where we're going, and then there could be a discussion right through into next year. So let's take a look at some different scenarios for the Tome Area School District. Basically what we're looking at here is forecast models that I put together, and I want to emphasize on all of these. 13, 14 numbers are still preliminary. We are showing a balanced budget. I think we're pretty close, but we're still waiting for those numbers, get them into Sundance, and that finally does their final calculations so we know what we have. So feeling pretty good about 13, 14 at this point in time. So then we need to start to say, well, what does it mean for 14, 15? Again, if we look at it and we're not defeasing, it's $8.28 on the mill rate. And I think it's just important to kind of keep these two numbers associated, because at some point in time when you start putting the numbers, and we'll look at just some different numbers here, the board is going to have to make a decision if they do want to solve some of these financial issues through a referendum. What are the dollar amounts are we going to, or are you going to ask for from our taxpayers or constituents here? So as we move across here, you can see revenues and expenditures are on the third and fourth line, and then the surplus deficits on the fifth line, and then the tax rate per $1,000 of equalized values on the final line, and those are highlighted in yellow. So as we're moving across the screen, again, 13, 14, we just talked about, but in 14, 15, if we look at those projected increases, and all projected increases are based on 1% on salary and a 8% on insurance, those increases. Now, the Finance Committee also asked me to put something together that would show a 2% increase on salary along with that, so that we just have some idea, because right now, last year you had a CPI at 3%, which we met, and this year you have about a 2%, and we'll see where that goes. But you know, you start to average just those 2 years, you're at a 2.5, you're not even at a 2, let alone a 1, so we'll want to see what that does and what effect it has on these numbers over here. So as we're looking at those numbers again in 14, 15, without any relief from a referendum, you're looking at a $732,633 deficit, again with a 1 and 8%. And minimal growth when we're talking about open enrollment and things like that, you know. So this is a pretty conservative bill, almost to the point where there's a part of me thinks it's almost too conservative. You know, we don't want to be short, but we don't want to say we need too much either, because either way we go, you know, there's ramifications for that. Then when we look at 15, 16, again, same 1 and 8% salary and fringe. You're looking at, you know, approximately rounded up a $1.7 million deficit. And then in 16, 17, about a $2,500,000 or $2,550,000 deficit in 16, 17. And of course, in 17, 18, you're looking at about a $3 million deficit. So what happens if we don't pass a deficit and we look at programs? That means you're going to have to cut $732,000. Very simple. What does that do to this number over here? It just simply drops this number by $732,000. So now you're looking at about $900,000 deficit. So the following year you're going to have to make those same $900,000 cuts. Take 900 off $2.5 million, now you're at a 1.6. So really, you know, when we say we're not going to cut our way out of this, you're not going to cut your way out of it. I mean, you can, but it really would be disastrous. You might get through 14, 15, but 15, 16, 16, 17, in some form or fashion is not going to be good. So if we want to then take a look at it again, that was without defeasance or referendum. So if we look at defeasing these dollars, and again, we're looking at what's going on. Again, this is with a defeasance and no referendum. And we've kind of talked about this already, so I don't know that we really need to focus on that block so much, because the numbers we talked about with the last screen. So we're going to move with defeasance and a referendum. So you'd be looking again, 13-14 balanced budget, you defease, you have that $8.69 on $1,000 of equalized value. 14-15, you would ask the taxpayers for $750,000. You would have a surplus of $17,000, but then your mill rate would then jump to about $8.98. Okay, you know, and you have to put this in perspective. I know for the taxpayer in the Toma School District, it's one thing, but when we look at it across the state, it still would probably put us right in the average. Right now, we're about the 43rd lowest, or that's what we were about last year, or right in that neighborhood. So we are a low spending district. Okay, and then if you looked at 15-16 and you went to ask for $1.5 million, that would jump to $9.80, and then at 16-17, if you ask for $2 million, you would have $9.97 on the mill rate there. So, you know, one of the things to keep in mind, there's no growth in equalized values projected in here. We had 8% this year. Those are those sand mines. We believe that when we look at those things, otherwise I think we would have had very, very moderate growth, much like we had last year, which was like 0.25% or something like that. You know, if you get around that 2% range, that starts to actually drive these numbers down, if you could get that on an annual basis. But I just, you know, again, it's a guessing game. You know, some of these dollar figures, how do you arrive at a $732,000 deficit? We have to really take a look at our revenue limit and how that is calculated. And when we look at our revenue limit this year, we're going to get $75 additional per student on the revenue limit, and then another $75 per student in categorical aid. That's a $150 increase per student. Separate those two, keep them separate. 75 goes on the revenue limit, so next year on the revenue limit, we get $75 credit for those students that we get to count next year, plus an additional $75. Okay? That other $75 that came in categorical aid, we'll get $75 this year and an additional $75 next year. But unlike the categorical or the revenue limit side of it, there's no guarantee the following year we'll get that money, because that's coming in categorical aid. It's not built into the formula. So whomever's in office and sets that next budget, they will have to find funding to add those dollars into that budget. It's not built into the system. Okay? So what do we put in there for those factors? What we've decided is that we're going to continue with the $75 increase on the revenue limit, and that we'll look at a $75 increase in categorical aid for basically a total increase per student, $150 per year. Is that too much? Is that too little? Well, we only got 50 last year, if memory serves me right. Okay, this year we're getting 150. Okay, next year you will be getting technically 225 when you look at that. So I guess, again, conservatively, you know, it gets to that point where you can make the numbers look however you want. So based on what we know today, we are taking a conservative approach. That's $75 on the revenue limit, $75 at categorical aid going forward, or $150 per student every year as an increase. Okay, I think to do more or less than that isn't probably appropriate. You know, there would have to be some significant change in order for that, I think, to happen. Student enrollment, when we're looking at that, we're planning next year for a loss of 22 students already. That needs to level off. We will not get out of this cycle until our enrollment levels off. If we continue to lose students, in some ways that's good because you're getting some dollars for declining enrollment. But after that declining enrollment stables off, then you suffer for about 2 to 3 years as you're moving off the declining enrollment and you're starting to move back up. So those are, again, this is the start of the conversation, okay, or the second conversation that we have had as a full board, with more conversations, so to speak, to come. I don't know if there's any questions. At this point in time, it's a lot. Certainly, it took me a while just to get a map of how I think we can show this and express this in a way that most of us would understand. Because certainly, like I said, after I got done looking at those documents, I'm thinking, this doesn't mean anything to me.
Well, the view, Greg, is a lot better than what the view we had before this.
What's that?
What you're presenting tonight is a lot better than what we had in previous meetings.
Well, yeah, I guess, but we need to focus really on this up here, because unless you pass a referendum, the only way to solve these deficits is by reducing programs, or reducing salary and fringe increases, or even potentially taking away. It's the only method. So when we look at down here, things start to look better. But this is really right now a what-if scenario. This is the scenario that you need to focus on. That's what we're focusing on as an administrative team. Okay, because we won't know the results of this until April if that's just when you decide to go. In the meantime, we have to plan for this. And we are planning for that. And hopefully, what we talked December, we would January be able to present something on it.
Well, if Walker threw $100 million into the pot, you said that was statewide. We didn't have that before.
Yeah, but keep in mind the $100 million really only affects your mill rate number. It's not helping us on the revenue limit side or the actual expense side. Okay, because we still have bills to pay up here, but it's helping the taxpayer. It's not really helping with our school expenses because the revenue limit only allows us to expend so many dollars, and that's really the problem.
Well, he did do something, Greg. I mean,
yeah, for the taxpayer.
Other meetings before, there was nothing. So when he threw that $100 million in there, it helped somebody.
Yes, it's helping the taxpayer. Yep. But keep in mind, as it's helping the taxpayer, it's not providing us the necessary relief to continue the programs that we currently have in the district.
I wish you'd dig a little deeper in that pot. That's possible.
So when you look at those two lines, I mean, in what we discussed, the finance, I mean, referendum isn't the solution and cutting isn't the solution. They both have to be.
Both will happen in some form or fashion, because if you look at 16, 17, and you can't get a real good shot of it, but if there's a $552,000 deficit, so in order to make up that $552,000 deficit, you're going to have to cut something. It's really, it's going to come back to the board to decide, is it $2 million you want to ask from the community? Is it 2.5? Because if we go out a little bit further and look at 17, 18, because you're talking about a 3-year recurring referendum. What that means is then in 17, 18, if things haven't changed, you're going to have to go out for a referendum and you will be $3 million short if you haven't done anything to solve these problems. And even if you have and you got the referendum passed, you're still going to have to take your reduction of that $550,000 we talked about here, lower this, and you'll still have to go to referendum in some form or fashion again. So once you're in this cycle, it's very tough to get out of unless your enrollment starts changing or the dollars you get on the revenue limit start increasing.
Okay, but that bottom line, I mean, that's with the referendum, but it doesn't assume any cuts.
Which?
The bottom row, the bottom set of numbers.
This?
Right.
Yeah, that's with the referendum, but it's not include any cuts, correct?
And so if those cuts were made even starting in 14, 15, that 3 million would be even lower than 3 million
If you cut
minus
50,000 in 14, before the start of the 14-15 year, then this number would change to a positive $580,000.
And I'm saying, playing that out, that in 17-18, that 3 million is going to be significantly lower than
Yeah,
just
about-
3 minus 550,000.
Yeah, about $2,450,000.
No, I think it would be much lower because you'd had the compounding effect of saving money from all the way from 14
No.
to 15.
No. If we cut 552,000, whether it's in 14-15 or 16-17, this money's not necessarily compounding.
Well, compounding, yeah, isn't the right word.
It doesn't roll up in any one given year. It's a fixed expense that you just eliminated. The only compounding of that fixed expense might be the increase in salary and fringes. So if we cut it in 14-15, in 15-16, you just, all you did is reduce your expenses by $552,000. So that makes it in 15-16, instead of a deficit of $185,000, now you have a positive $320,000.
Okay.
16-17, now you have zero. Okay, but because you reduced your expenses in 17-18, now instead of expenses of $3 million, now you have $2.4 million. Because it doesn't, you don't get $550,000 every year. You got your budget figure, all you're doing up here on your expenses is taking $550,000 away. So if you do that this year, that means your expenses next year are going to be $550,000 less, correct?
Mm-hmm.
$550,000 less the next year, not including inflationary costs. $550,000 less the next year.
I'll have to think, yeah, I'll have to think through that.
Not buying it?
Well, no, I just have to think through it, because on the top one, the final number was all based upon the fact that each year you were adding on that number. It's not that you're getting that every year, you're not spending it, and so I've got to think it through. I'm sorry, I'm not smart enough to do it on the spot.
Well, now you got me worried.
I'm just hoping that the numbers would be
on each
better.
of these plans, look at 17-18. Regardless of what you do, it's $3 million.
Yeah.
Okay, the only thing that's changing as you're looking at these numbers here is based on a referendum, what it's doing to the numbers in 16-17. What those referendum dollars in that year take away from your deficit.
Yeah, but I'm more focused on not making the cuts and not spending $500,000 every year from 14, 15 on.
Yeah, and it's $550,000 less. Just take these expenses in each year, right now, across the board, and take away $550,000 in expenses. Take 550 minus this number, 550 minus this number, and this number. That will tell you what your expenses are for each of those years.
So the way I would be looking at it is $500,000 for 3 years, that's 1.5 million, so instead of that 3 million at the end.
No, you're rolling it up. You can't,
Well,
you can't do that because these expenses here are based on compounding expenses based on inflationary factors like a 1% increase on salary, 8% increase. That's where your increases for these are coming from. You're just taking the $550,000 of an expense away. You still have those inflationary costs on this side of the table.
Yeah, I understand that. Okay.
They're just one-time takeaways.
It's like you eliminate 10 teachers. Those 10 teachers, those costs are gone. You don't get to take each year another 10 teachers and another 10 teachers. It's just 10 teachers in that whole 5-time time frame that you eliminated. It's going to, again, it's going to reduce in 14, 15. Now I'm just going to take and add 550,000 to this number, so you have a surplus of, over here, I'm going to add 550 to this number, so I'm going to be at about 320,000. And at this number, you take that 550 away and you're going to be at 0.
Yeah, all right.
I think it gets confusing with the compounding because, every time you add that 1% salary or 8% health insurance extra, then the next year it's another 8% and a 1%.
Yes.
So you're compounding that as it increases, but this would not.
But not those expenses that you cut because those are fixed costs.
My job is done.
Greg, when we go to the next Board Academy meeting, I know you and Cindy have been thinking about this. What are you going to have a list of probable places we can cut within the district?
No. We're going to bring those, we're going to wait, and we're still formulating those things with the administrators, and I think Cindy and I both talked about it, and we're thinking either the 1st of December or January 1st, one of those areas that we're bringing in.
Somewhere along the line, you will be thinking that out.
Yep.
And we've begun that process, but we're not prepared to have any final.
Understood.
And we're also, cautious because we need to talk to people that are going to be impacted. And we don't want to get ahead of ourselves and create a lot of fear for people as well. So.
But you say either December or January, huh? Some heavy figures on that board.
Okay, all right, well, thank you, Greg, and thanks for the patience.